Hey Ryan, how do I get project-based learning started at my school? I've gotten some form of this question nearly every day for the last decade from engaged educators just like you. So at Magnify Learning, we've created a free download to get you started. Whether you're a superintendent, principal, coach, or teacher, go to whatispbl.com to get started on your project-based learning journey today. Are you ready to bring project-based learning to your school? The PBL Simplified podcast will help equip you for your PBL journey with weekly need-to-knows, engaging interviews, PBL showcases from facilitators in the classroom, and PBL leadership episodes to move you towards a successful implementation of PBL. Because every learner deserves to be a part of an inspiring story, and we see daily that project-based learning helps make this happen. If you want me to answer your PBL need-to-know on the podcast, visit whatispbl.com and click on Ask Ryan to submit your question. Welcome to PBL Simplified. I'm your host, Ryan Stoyer, and this is episode 108. 108 is a special episode. This is a working episode. So if you listen to 107, which you should, you'll hear Banff Academy from Scotland. And what they did, very clever. We connected via Twitter and social media, and I said, hey, you guys are doing awesome things. By the way, they are a great Twitter follow. And I said, why don't you come on the podcast and share some of those ideas? And they said, we'd love to. By the way, while we're talking, can you answer a couple of need-to-knows that we have? It's like, oh, well done. It's like, that is a great idea. So what we did is we recorded the interview. That's episode 107. And now, episode 108, we recorded the working session where they had some need-to-knows they brought to me, and we talk through them and go back and forth. So you can kind of be a fly on the wall and hear what this working session could be. And I'm going to ask for it in the actual episode, I think, but I'd love your feedback on this episode. Would you like more of this? Because we have more of these, right? Like every time I talk to an administrator, whether it's an assistant superintendent, principal, coach, a lot of those are on Zoom. Right? And we record those so that the person being coached can get that for their files. But I wonder if we share those with you. Like, do you want more of these fly on the wall episodes? If you do, would you go, or if you don't, actually, either way, would you go to whatispbl.com, whatispbl.com, and just click on Ask Ryan and let me know what you think about this episode. I had a great time recording it, but it doesn't mean you want to hear it, right? So I think that you'll resonate, though, with a lot of this working session piece, and I think there's a lot of nuggets that you can take out of there and run with. So enjoy this working episode. All right, PBL Simplified audience, I want to welcome you back. I say back because this is really a continuation episode. If you haven't heard it, I'd like you to go back to the Banff Academy interview where I talk with Nick and Hannah, and they outline their journey. And it's just a great case study of how I would absolutely recommend you start. And you'll hear their mindset is right on par as well, of a growth mindset, continuing to grow, share wins. So go back to that episode and listen to that. Because what you're tuning into now is a workshop episode. Like, we're just going to jump into the work. So Banff Academy in Scotland is a PBL school. I've got Nick and Hannah here who are leading the charge there with project-based learning. And they're really open with, like, this is a process we're working through. Right? Like, we've had some successes, but we also have questions. And if you're listening to this and you're a school leader who's in process right now, like, we're always in process. So we're just going to jump into a work session and just kind of go back and forth and see where we go. So you can kind of be a fly on the wall and learn as we jump in. So Hannah and Nick, thanks for jumping in again. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, for sure. Again, I've kind of got your story, right? Our listeners have your story. So what are some things that you're thinking about as far as improvement, or maybe some pinch points that you have?
Yeah, so we mentioned in the podcast that we've went out to visit schools around the world. And what we saw there was amazing project-based learning, but possibly on a smaller scale in terms of the amount of students that are taking part in one project. Because we're not a huge school, but we have between 150 to 200 students per year group. And we're delivering that one project to the entire year group at the same time. So we wanted some tips on how to maintain consistency when one project is being delivered to multiple classes by a variety of different teachers.
Yeah. So that's a good question, right? There's a lot of complexities in that question. I think you guys have done a nice job from what I understand thus far, maybe using a video. I don't know if you're getting like all of your learners into one spot so that a community partner can come in. I know in the real early days when I was in the classroom, we actually knocked down a wall so we could get 125 kids into a room, right? And so that a community partner could present to everybody. So that's definitely an option. So then from there, you've got this one consistent message that's gone to 125 kids, whatever it is. And then from there, you can back out and then your teachers can dive into the work in an individual way. The other way is because that works for your community partner, right? A community partner can come in for an hour, present or give a video or can jump in asynchronously or maybe via Zoom. That works on the community partner's end. Now, if you get some deeper community partners, and by that, I mean you have a close relationship with them, like they know you, they love you, you respect their time, they respect your work, maybe they can come in for 4 hours, right? And they can present to your smaller groups, right? They can present to 4 groups of 30. And if you developed, let's say you had 4 of those community partnerships that were really deep, they're willing to come in for 4 hours, you could rotate through, right? Groups of 30 for, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and rotate through, and everybody could hear from those different community partners. So I think you're on the right track in that, having 200 teenagers in the room is maybe not always the most productive way to present information. But having a community partner in the room in person is also really engaging, right? So I think you're on the right track. How does that resonate with you? Do you follow-up questions?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's like finding solutions to, it's a wonderful problem to have, right? We've got making such an impact on so many pupils. So it's sometimes exactly what you've done there, maybe using the problem and seeing if we can use that as a strength. And one of the things we've talked about as well, they're great solutions, as well as can we use some protocols that we maybe identify a smaller number from each class that experiences the community partner that then has that big role to go back to the class and feed that back. And okay, the consistency you can lose a bit in the consistency of doing that, but the experience you gain of giving that ownership and empowering the pupils to do that is, I think, worth that loss of consistency. So I think, just as you said, definitely using videos, maybe getting big groups together. And yeah, the more we build relationships with our community partners, that we can steal more of their time to make that difference, then absolutely. But I think the big challenge we have is seeing these problems, but finding solutions that maybe force us to think even more creatively about the impact, and ultimately having changing our teaching and learning so it's for the better, because them protocols, I think, will work wonders in terms of the experience and again providing skills and experiences for our pupils.
Yeah, we've spoke about fairs and we've spoke about workshops, but I suppose it's just moving away from the home learning and all the digital experiences that we had during COVID, and being able to now bring partners into the school and our students to go out more into the community. We're just having to rethink the way that we do things.
Yeah.
Two follow-up thoughts that I have to that. One, and Nick, you kind of smiled when you said this, like stealing time from community partners. But if you've built the relationship, like you're really giving them a gift, right? Because it's unlikely, like we're probably not going to give a financial donation to a school. Sometimes we can, but really the gift of serving, that really is compensation for industry partners. Like they want to do that. We want to give back. Like if I'm an accountant and I punch numbers all day, it's important work, right? It helps those companies do their work. But I also like getting to communicate to kids and give back, like that is something that I want. So it is compensation, right? Like, so I think it's important to look at it as a give, right? A win-win scenario. The other thought to this first question, and we can move on to another one if you'd like, is in your question, you said maintaining consistency, but you also don't want robotic standardization, right? So maybe being important about what needs to be consistent and what doesn't. Right? Like if I'm a teacher in a classroom, like I'm going to teach very differently than the person next to me. Like, and that's a real example, right? Like I just teach differently than other people, right? Somebody's maybe very relational and somebody's maybe more task oriented. So where can you give your teachers freedom and where do you need to be consistent in order to help learners have the experiences that they need? So you might be able to flex some of that.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. That chimes with a lot of what we think here
Yeah.
at Banff Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah, consistency of experience, but maybe not of the delivery. And
Yeah, because it has been such a cultural shift in the way that teachers planning things more collaboratively for these projects, and the way that they deliver them, but also the way in which the students learn. It's almost like we're teaching them how to do projects at the same time as doing those projects, and it is a huge shift. So you don't want to lose that the teacher personalization in there. And the experience that they get and the relationship they get with those individual teachers.
Yeah, or of the pupil, because it's exactly that. PBL isn't a one size fits all.
Yeah.
That's why we love it and why we're doing it.
Yeah, that's right. What else do you want to touch on?
So a big one for us, and this is like, we have a really good culture in our school of, adopting this change and charging forward. That big question I get asked a lot, I suppose, from teachers and colleagues is, how would you incorporate PBL into qualification level classes for us? So in Scotland, our BGE, which is our broad general education, which is from 11 to 14, kind of naturally fits really well in terms of PBL. Okay, we have subject silos, and what I love about PBL is it breaks that barriers down, it connects the learning. But in our senior phase, some teachers would say, they need to focus on qualifications, and they need to narrow what they do to jump through the exam hoop, because that ultimately is what's measured and what's important. So I guess the question is, how would we incorporate that? How do I show my teachers that it is possible and that we can do both? We can make sure that we have attainment measured in terms of exam success, but we're also best preparing our pupils with the skills that they gain through learning that in a project-based fashion.
Yeah, so it's a good question. Comes up often, right? Whether we're across the pond and talking about standardized tests, like everybody has these standardized tests, right? Wherever you're at. So it's a real thing, right? So one, we don't just discard that, right? Like that's a real concern for your teachers. It's part of their job. The first thing I would do is maybe, and you don't have to do this right away when you get the question, but don't answer the question, right? As you sidestep it a bit, a different PD session, not in that scenario, but let your teachers go through what we call an ideal graduate. Right. So what do you want your learners to know by the time they leave your class or your school? Another way to put that, I worked with a group of science teachers. So, well, what do you want? Like, you want your learners to be scientists in a way. What do you want them to think about? Well, they never really say like slope intercept form. They never say complex sentences, right? They never say these kind of standards-based things. They say, well, I want them to think like a scientist. I want them to see problems around, but I want them to have a solution process, right? So they might say the scientific method, right? But that's a process, right? These big pieces. That's what, as educators, that's what we get fired up about. And so bring that in and then say, okay, well, how many of those are you actually getting to teach? Right, like what you're teaching, does it bring your learners to those outcomes of better communicators, of better problem solvers and critical thinkers? It's like, well, typically not, right? So how can we do that and meet the standardized tests that we have, the qualification level classes? Like, because we can do both and we should do both. So once you kind of frame that a little bit differently of, because sometimes that question is hiding from change, right? Like, I don't want to change what I do. I'm going to say it's because of this qualification exam. And maybe I legitimately don't see it either, right? Like, I don't see how I can do both of these. Well, and we've got research now around project-based learning in these high school courses around qualification exams that our learners are doing better on the qualification exams because they have deeper learning. And the way I frame that is project-based learning gives you more context to the problems that you're trying to solve. Or I like to say handles, right? It gives you handles to those things. When you have a broader view of whatever, let's say it's biology, right? So it's this high school biology course. Like, you can memorize the terms or you can use the terms, right? And once you've used the terms, you're much more likely to do well in that qualification exam because you've actually used the terms, not just memorized them. And you hope that those 5 are on the test, right? That, man, I hope because I really know those 5, right? I did those note cards. So if we can get to like the deeper learning side of it, so that's the mindset portion. And then the practical portion is to break down that qualification test. What are the big buckets on that qualification test, right? Like whatever those, let's say there's 3 of them. And then you build your PBL unit around those. so that you're directly assessing those things. So in some ways, the same work that your teacher was doing last year, that becomes a workshop, right? Like you're still going to teach that test in a way, but now it has context. The driving question gives it authenticity and gives learners those handles to hang on to it. So you still have to get to the practical side for the teacher to say, this is what we're going to do. Like, let's plan this out with you, do this together, and so that they can see it. I had one teacher, we literally had to get the Post-it notes out for each day, like day 1, here it is, day 2. And we took this out, right? Because it was fall breaks. We took 2 of those off, right? So that she could see, like, this is how it flows. Like I still get to address my learning. I don't like to say cover my learning, right? If you're saying covering your learning, then you're probably not really engaged. But that's kind of the process. Like first there's a mindset shift that there are things more important than that qualification test, but we're not discounting that qualification test, right? That's a real thing. So how do we get our learners to do well on that? And just one last thing is we go back to, like, if you said what's important in biology to learn, it's probably the things on that qualification test, right? Like, so there's some legitimacy that our learners should know those things. We just want them to do it in context, and they'll likely do better on that qualification test.
Yeah, the thing I've jotted down there was directly assessing the content. And I think it can go too broad, or it can go down a route that you might not want it to go because you don't have the time to cover it. But if you're making sure your milestones, if you like to call it that, is directly assessing that content that is essential to make sure they have the knowledge when they go in to sit that exam, that goes a long way, I think, of calming the nerves, that is a solution and that is a pedagogy that we can use to deliver that deeper learning. That's another big word there. You know, if the learning's deep enough and it's provided in a context like you've just explained, then it should make it sticky enough. Sticky learning that it's going to remember for the exam, you know, rather than just trying to cram it and remember it. It's more about applying it, and if they've used it, then it should be sticky enough that it stays with them, and it's useful for the exam, but it's also useful in our real world context, which is exactly what we're wanting.
Yeah, giving them the purpose and the relevance and the why.
Yeah.
But we can see pockets where it fits in our senior curriculum. We have things like travel and tourism courses. We have a creative thinking course, and we have a health sector course, and they're already working with partners on a weekly basis, and we can definitely see the connection there of structuring it into a project. But for me, when I'm thinking, if we get the junior phases right, which is our first, second, and third year, where they're fully engaged with their learners, they're enthusiastic, they're resilient, they're confident, then they're going to be so better prepared for our senior phase, and we'll see those reflected in the results.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my dream, I suppose, is that because we're early in this, I'm hoping that our current first or second years, by the time they get to their senior phase, I hope they're knocking on my office door and they're going, Mr. Malkin, why are we not learning in a project-based learning fashion? I want to be doing it that way for my exams. You know,
yeah, that's right. And that can happen. You also do want to recognize that, you know, your younger levels, that learning and the teachers are different than your upper level learning and the teachers, right? It just draws different people. Typically, when we get up into our upper learning areas, you do develop some silos. You're a little more academic. So you do still need to recognize that there's different personalities there, right? That are working there. One last thing on that one is, if it's a really technical subject, you might also bring in problem-based learning. So where project-based learning might be 4 to 6 weeks, problem-based learning might be 4 to 6 days, right? So it's a smaller chunk, but you're still bringing the authenticity and trying to bring context to, maybe some of these obscure standards that are going to be on the test that maybe don't fit. Like there are some things like they just legitimately don't fit, right? So how are we going to problem solve that? That could be another tool that your teachers might appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good. Is that our
Any other questions?
I've got one for you. So I'd love your feedback. So our new stated goal at Magnify Learning is to have 51% of schools doing project-based learning by 2051. So like, what are ways that we can stay connected to you, right? Like we kind of reached out via Twitter and almost happenstance, right? Of we're always looking for people that are, using similar words and on the similar path. But what does it look like for you guys to plug into a larger community? How can we help you?
Let me think. I mean, yes, we would love to plug into that community because, again, even this process of sharing what we're doing, it is supporting our process over here of delivering what we're doing. So the more we're involved in that, it is going to support again and help us to help you. It's a win-win.
Yeah.
And we're always for win-wins. So yeah, I mean, how we do that, I don't know. I would need time to think about that one, but yeah.
We've used we love the Magnify Learning resources. Like I said, we've got the book. We're waiting for the new book because it's January that it's coming out.
Yep, January 17th. It'll be out.
But when we've created our own to fit our school context in the context of the Scottish curriculum, when we've created our own school project-based learning how-to guide and a project-based learning toolkit, we've utilised a lot of the resources that we found on your website.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have something in terms of professional learning. Every month we have a teaching and learning spotlight, which we put out, which just signposts things that we would fit to our context and fit to what we might want to focus that sort of month. But we have included some of your work already, but I'm imagining as we go forward, we'll be using that and signposting certain things that resonates with our journey, where we're at that stage and where they can look to expand and maybe hear. Maybe even this podcast will appear on that. I don't know, but yeah, absolutely. So just signposting that to our staff in terms of their professional learning and where they might want to spend some time thinking, and then using that through their faculties to discuss some of these questions that we've talked about today.
Yeah, I'd recommend just talking to our listener again now. Is like Nick and Hannah have just been sharing their story on the podcast, and kind of our off-air feedback is like it's just helpful to share your story. Like even it's not perfect. Nobody's story is. Like even as you're starting, go out to a conference and share, right? Like take one thing that you know you're really good at and go share that at a conference. And as you get to talk about it, you get feedback. Other people can start to collaborate. Those are really important things to do. Even just this little session, your fly on the wall session, we just went through a couple questions that they had. Like that's really easy to do. It took us 15, 20 minutes or so, right? To do those kinds of things. Like you can do that as you build collaborators. Like we're happy to do that at Magnify Learning, but just get a group that you're walking through life with and schedule this, right? So I say like, you have to be geeky about this, right? Like, hey, school, 40 miles away. Do you guys want to Zoom real quick or do you want to meet at a coffee shop? And, we've got a couple questions. You probably have some questions, create your own conference, like just get with other people. Don't do it on your own. Right? Like you've got to collaborate. Really, you have to live the process, right? If you live the PBL process, and we just hear again and again, like teachers' lives are changed and like in school, but out of school, right? Like we've got a facilitator now, like he just started a band because it's like, as he's helping learners like figure out their life and like live their passion and inspiration, he's like, yeah, I'm going to do that too, And so it's worthwhile all the way around. Nick and Hannah, thanks for letting us kind of eavesdrop in and be a fly on the wall in our little learning session. I've appreciated it. Definitely loved getting to know you guys and your story and your school. And I am certainly honored that you let us kind of speak into that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan, for having us on. We've enjoyed the process and we'll continue to listen, and we look forward to just continuing our process, and we look forward to seeing what we can do here at Banff Academy. Yeah,
we're excited too. We'll definitely watch it on Twitter, and we'll have to check in now and again to see how things are going. Hey, as you're listening, I want you to give me specific feedback about this episode, kind of the fly on the wall episode. So if you go to whatispbl.com, there's an Ask Ryan button, and you don't have to ask me, just give me feedback on that. Like, would you like to hear more of these sessions? Is it helpful to just hear live feedback and just kind of how we interact and are able to help schools and learn from schools, right? Like I learned a ton today. So I'd love some feedback on that. I liked it. It felt good for me, right? And I like just be able to give like live feedback. It's one of my favorite things is be able to speak into other schools and support the work that's out there. So as we do that together, we're all going to be able to engage our learners, tackle boredom, and transform our classrooms.